Infertile giant Apache paid $2 for pregnant obese teen. What he did to her next shocked everyone. In the heart of a snow-covered frontier town, a jeering crowd gathers as a trembling girl is sold like cattle. Mocked for her weight, shamed for her swelling belly, until a towering Apache giant steps forward. He lays down $2 silver, shocking the town silent. But instead of claiming her, he throws his buffalo hide coat over her shoulders and says the words no one expected. She's under my protection. What follows is a bond born of fire and storm, a fragile home built in the pines, and a child that powerful men would do anything to steal. Because hidden behind that baby's birth is a dangerous truth, one that could ignite a war between bloodlines, legacy, and honor. Will the outcast giant and the girl the world discarded find family, or will their only hope be ripped away by greed and pride? And when the gunsmoke clears, who will still be standing? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The winter wind howled through the streets of the Colorado border town, cutting through Maggie O'Donnell's thin cotton dress like icy daggers. Her bare feet had gone numb on the wooden crate where her stepfather had forced her to stand. The jeering faces of the crowd blurred through her tears as rough voices called out cruel jokes about her size and the slight swell of her belly. 2 bits for the fat Irish girl, someone shouted from the back. Ain't worth feed and water, another voice added, followed by harsh laughter. Maggie's stepfather swayed on his feet, whiskey bottle clutched in his grimy hand. She's young and strong. Good for work, or he let the words trail off with a leer that made Maggie's stomach turn. Who'll give me a fair price? The crowd's taunts grew louder, and Maggie squeezed her eyes shut. She could smell the whiskey and tobacco, hear the scrape of boots on packed dirt, feel dozens of mocking stares burning into her skin. Her arms wrapped protectively around her middle, where her unborn child grew. She hadn't asked for any of this. Not the wealthy rancher's son who'd sweet-talked her with promises. Not the shame that followed, not her stepfather's rage when he'd discovered her condition. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. Maggie opened her eyes to see the crowd parting like water around a rock. Through the gap strode the tallest man she'd ever seen, his dark eyes set in a weathered face marked by old scars. His black hair hung in 2 long braids, and he moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion. She recognized him as Apache from the stories she'd heard, though she'd never seen one of the feared warriors up close before. The huge man stopped before the crate. Without a word, he reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out $2 silver. The coins clinked as he set them on the wooden block beside Maggie's feet. Their shine caught the weak winter sunlight. Her stepfather's laugh came out as a bark. You think $2 is enough for? She comes with me. The Apache's voice was deep as thunder, quiet but carrying an authority that silenced every voice in the crowd. His accent shaped the English words differently, but his meaning was clear as crystal. Maggie trembled, unsure if this fate would be better or worse than what she'd faced before. The warrior's face was unreadable as stone. Her stepfather's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. Now see here, Indian, you can't just. The Apache warrior turned his head slowly to fix those dark eyes on her stepfather. Something in that look made the older man stumble back a step, nearly dropping his bottle. The crowd drew back further, whispers replacing their earlier jeers without another word. The tall man shrugged off his buffalo hide coat and reached up to wrap it around Maggie's shoulders. The fur was thick and warm, still carrying the heat of his body. His hands were gentle as he helped her down from the crate, steady and strong when her numb feet nearly gave way beneath her. Come, he said simply, and began walking toward the edge of town. Maggie followed, clutching the coat around her, aware of the stunned silence behind them. No one moved to stop them. They walked until the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the winter sky in streaks of orange and purple. The town had fallen away behind them, and the only sounds were their boots crunching in the snow and the lonely cry of a far-off coyote. Maggie's feet ached with cold, but she didn't dare complain. She kept waiting for the warrior to reveal his true intentions, for the other shoe to drop. Instead, he stopped and gestured to a fallen log. Rest. From his pack, he pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle and offered it to her. Inside, she found a heel of bread and a water skin. Maggie stared at the food, then at the tall man who stood a respectful distance away, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Why?" she whispered. He turned back to her, his face softening slightly. "No man shall touch you," he said firmly. "You are safe now." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes, but for the first time that day, they weren't tears of fear or shame. She bit into the bread, savoring its simple sweetness. The buffalo coat was warm around her shoulders, and though uncertainty still gnawed at her heart, something else was there too, a tiny spark of hope, as fragile as a bird's egg, but just as real. The warrior who had bought her freedom for 2 silver dollars waited patiently while she ate, his presence somehow both powerful and gentle. As the last light faded from the sky, Maggie realized that this strange, scarred man had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she'd known in years. Whatever tomorrow might bring, for this moment at least, she was truly safe. The mountain trail stretched before them like a white ribbon through the darkening forest. Maggie's feet, wrapped in strips of cloth Nantan had torn from his own shirt, dragged through the deep snow. Each step felt heavier than the last. The buffalo coat, while warm, added weight to her already exhausted body. Nantan walked beside her, matching his long stride to her stumbling pace. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to every shadow and sound in the winter wilderness. When Maggie's ankle turned on a hidden root, his hand shot out to steady her, strong fingers gripping her elbow until she found her footing. "Much obliged," she whispered, the words forming clouds in the frigid air. It was the first thing she'd said in hours. Nantan nodded, then paused, studying her flushed face. Without a word, he moved off the trail and drew his knife. Maggie's heart jumped, but he only used it to cut several fragrant pine boughs, arranging them in a makeshift seat. "Rest," he said, gesturing to the greenery. "Feet need time." Maggie sank onto the soft branches, grateful tears pricking her eyes as she lifted her swollen feet off the cold ground. Nantan crouched nearby, respectfully distant but close enough to guard. The setting sun painted the snow in shades of rose and gold. "How?" Maggie cleared her throat. "How far to where we're going?" "Cabin half day more," Nantan replied, his deep voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Too dark soon. No good shelter near." As if to emphasize his words, a chill wind rustled through the pines. Maggie pulled the buffalo coat tighter, watching her strange protector through lowered lashes. His profile was sharp against the darkening sky, proud but not cruel. Still, experience had taught her that men's kindness often came with a price. When her breathing steadied, they continued on. The last light was fading when Nantan led her off the main trail to a crude lianto built against a rocky outcropping. Old ashes in a stone ring showed it was a regular stopping place. "Stay," he instructed, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. Maggie huddled in the shelter, listening to the snap of branches as he moved through the forest. Soon he returned. With an armload of dry wood working efficiently, Nantan built a small fire, screening it partially with rocks to contain the light. The flames cast dancing shadows on the lean-to's walls. From his pack, he drew out a leather pouch and offered her strips of dried venison. Maggie accepted the food cautiously. The meat was tough but flavorful, easing the hollow ache in her stomach. As she chewed, she gathered her courage. "Why did you buy me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Nantan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer when he spoke. His words came slowly, carefully chosen. "Many moons ago, in battle with blue coats, bullet, find me here." He touched his side. "Medicine man saved life." But he paused, searching for words. "Cannot make children now." "Great. Shame among my people." Maggie's hand unconsciously moved to her own belly, where her child grew. "See you at auction. Spirits speak to me," Nantan continued. "Say here is chance for family. Child need father." "I need," he stopped, looking into the fire. "Need purpose again. Could be good father. Teach child ways of land, of honor. You want my baby." Maggie's arms wrapped protectively around herself. Nantan shook his head. "Want to protect both? Give home, food, safety. Be father if child accept me. Be," he hesitated, "be friend to you, if you allow. Not master, never master." Maggie studied his face in the firelight, searching for deceit. She found only openness, and something else, a loneliness that matched her own. "I don't know if I can trust that," she admitted softly. "Trust comes slow, like spring after winter," Nantan replied. "No rush." He moved to the edge of the lean-to shelter, giving her space. As the fire burned lower, he began to pray. First, in his own language, flowing words she couldn't understand, then in halting English. "Great Spirit," he said, "thank you for a new chance. I'll protect this woman, this child. Show me good path to be father, to be worthy of trust given." Maggie watched him through the flames, wonder replacing some of her fear. This giant of a man, this warrior who could snap her like a twig, prayed with the gentle humility of a child. It didn't fit with the savage tales she'd heard of his people. The fire's warmth and her exhaustion soon pulled her toward sleep. As her eyes grew heavy, she tugged Nantan's buffalo coat closer around her shoulders. Its weight felt less like a burden now, more like a promise. Before sleep took her completely, she heard Nantan moving quietly around the camp, banking the fire, setting branches to block the wind. Standing guard, she realized, not over a possession, but over someone he hoped might become family. Dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, painting the sky in streaks of pale pink and gold. Maggie stirred beneath the buffalo coat, her muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground. Had already rekindled the fire and was brewing a bitter tea from bark. They set out as soon as the light grew strong enough to see the trail. The snow had deepened overnight, reaching past Maggie's ankles. Each step required effort, and she found herself breathing heavily despite the cold air. Nantan broke trail ahead of her, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the drifts. The morning sun climbed higher, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. As they walked, Maggie's eyes were drawn to the scars visible on Nantan's neck, disappearing beneath his collar. Some looked like knife wounds, others like burns. Scars, she ventured quietly. Were they all from fighting? Nantan touched his neck briefly. "Most from Blue Coat's soldiers," he explained. "Many battles before peace treaty. This one," he traced a long mark along his jaw, "from cavalry saber. Young soldier, scared. I was. More scared, but had better aim." He fell silent for several steps before continuing. "Worst scar here." He gestured to his side where the bullet had struck. 2 winters passed. Patrol thought our hunting party was war party. Shot first, asked questions, never. His voice held more sorrow than bitterness. Medicine man saved life, but price was high. No children possible now. Maggie's hand went instinctively to her belly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Nantan shrugged. His massive shoulders. What is, is. Great Spirit has different path for me. By midday, they reached a creek locked in winter's grip. Nantan helped Maggie settle on a fallen log, then used his knife to chip through the ice. He built a small fire and set water to boil in a battered tin pot. Watch, he instructed, gathering green pine needles. He showed her how to crush them between her fingers before dropping them into the hot water. Pine tea. Good for strength, good for warming inside. The tea was sharp and resinous, but it spread welcome warmth through Maggie's tired body. She watched as Nantan moved with precise care, banking the fire before they continued their journey. The afternoon sun was low when Nantan paused at the top of a ridge. "Look," he said, pointing ahead. Home. Maggie caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a protected hollow surrounded by towering pines, stood a solid cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, promising warmth. What struck her most was the obvious care taken with everything around it. Neat stacks of split wood lined one wall. A small corral held a well-fed mule, and she could make out the corner of what looked like a vegetable garden under the snow. "You live here alone?" she asked, surprised by the size and stability of the dwelling. Nantan nodded. "Build with own hands. Take 3 summers. Learn from mission school before." He trailed off, then added simply, "before war." They made their way down to the cabin. Up close, Maggie could see the precise joining of the logs, the carefully chinked spaces between them. Nantan opened the heavy wooden door, stepping back to let her enter first. The interior was plain but orderly. A stone hearth dominated one wall, its fire burning low but steady. Simple furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame with a straw tick, showed the same careful craftsmanship as the cabin itself. Shelves held cooking implements, jars of preserved food, and to Maggie's surprise, several books. "You read?" she asked, unable to hide her astonishment. "Some," Nantan replied. "Mission. Teachers thought reading important. Agree with them on that, if little else." He moved to the hearth, adding wood and hanging a pot over the flames. "Rest now. Make food soon." Maggie sank into one of the chairs, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. She watched as Nantan worked, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he measured dried beans and corn into the pot. He moved with quiet efficiency, adding herbs and a piece of dried meat to the stew. The cabin slowly filled with the savory smell of cooking food. Nantan set 2 tin plates on the table, along with spoons that showed signs of being carefully polished. Everything spoke of order, of dignity maintained despite isolation. "Never thought," Maggie began, then stopped, embarrassed. "Never thought Apache lived this way." Nantan finished for her, his voice gentle. "Many ways to live with honor. This my way." He served the stew, then sat across from her, his large frame making the chair seem small. They ate in comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. Maggie felt the tension slowly leaving her shoulders, though uncertainty about her place in this strange new world remained. When she stifled a yawn, Nantan rose and gathered blankets from a chest. He arranged them on the bed, then took extra blankets to make a pallet for himself near the hearth. "Sleep well," he said simply. "Tomorrow, show you more of home." Maggie watched him bank the fire for the night, each movement deliberate and careful. Like everything else about him, it spoke not of the savagery she'd been taught to expect, but of thought and care taken in even the smallest tasks. She lay down on the bed, pulling the blankets close. The straw tick was softer than the ground, had been, and the cabin's warmth wrapped around her like a blessing. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Nantan settle onto his pallet, its massive form somehow making her feel not threatened, but protected. That evening, as the stew simmered on the hearth, Maggie gathered her courage. The question had been burning. Inside her, since they'd arrived, she twisted her apron between her fingers, watching Nantan stir the pot. "What?" Her voice cracked, and she started again. "What do you expect of me here, I mean?" Nantan turned from the fire, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Cook if you wish," he said simply. "Rest if you must." He gestured around the cabin. "No chains. Not prisoner." Maggie blinked back sudden tears. After years of demands and harsh words, his simple answer felt like a gift she wasn't sure she deserved. When night fell, Nantan surprised her by settling into the wooden chair near the door, leaving the bed for her. But Maggie shook her head, taking her blankets to the hearth instead. The warmth of the fire felt safer, and she could see him from there, his broad silhouette keeping watch through the night. Dawn arrived with a pale winter sun. Nantan rose early, waiting patiently while Maggie pulled on her boots and wrapped herself in the buffalo coat. He led her to a narrow path through the snow, down to where a stream ran swift enough to resist freezing. "Water here," he explained, showing her how to break through the thin ice at the edges. "Bring 2 buckets, makes work easier." Back at the cabin, he demonstrated how to split kindling, his powerful hands making the task look simple. When he handed Maggie the axe, she gripped it uncertainly like this, he said, adjusting her grip. "Let weight of axe do work." Her first swing went wild, and the axe head buried itself in a snowbank. Maggie stood there, mortified, until she heard an unexpected sound. Nantan was chuckling, a warm, rich sound that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Before she could stop herself, Maggie laughed too. "I reckon I need more practice," she said, fishing the axe from the snow. "Practice makes skill," Nantan agreed, still smiling. "Try again." Days settled into a gentle rhythm. Maggie found peace in the simple tasks of cabin life. She mixed cornmeal and water, learning to judge the heat of the Dutch oven by holding her hand over it. Her first attempts at cornbread were dark on the bottom, but Nantan ate them without complaint. He brought home rabbits and showed her how to skin them, his careful instructions helping her overcome her initial squeamishness. In the evenings, they shared stories she told him about her mother's songs from the old country, and he spoke of his people's traditions, teaching her Apache words for things like snow and fire. One evening, as Maggie stirred a pot of beans, Nantan suddenly went still. His head turned toward the window, listening. A moment later, she heard it too, the sound of horses approaching. Nantan moved silently to the window, then beckoned her over. Maggie's heart nearly stopped when she saw the riders. Even in the gathering dusk, she recognized the Circle Bar brand. On their horses, the mark of James Holbrook's ranch, the same James Holbrook whose son had left her with child and whose family had turned her away in shame. 5 riders, Nantan murmured. Armed, heavy fists pounded on the door. "Open up," a rough voice demanded. "We know you've got the O'Donnell girl in there." Maggie pressed herself against the wall, one hand protectively over her belly. "They'll take me back," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "No." Nantan's voice was firm but quiet. "You choose. Not them." The pounding came again. "Send her out, Apache. That's Holbrook property she's carrying. Mr. James wants his grandchild raised proper, not by some savage." Maggie saw Nantan's jaw tighten at the word savage, but his eyes remained calm when they met hers. He moved to the corner where his rifle stood, checking it with practiced hands. "Your choice," he said again. "Stay or go." "I stand with your decision." Hot tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks, but her voice was steady. "I won't go back. This child is mine, not theirs. They threw me away. They don't get to claim me now." Nantan nodded once, then called out in his deep voice. "Woman chooses too. Stay her right. Go back to Holbrook. Tell him she is under Apache protection now, like hell she is." The door shuddered under a renewed assault. "We're coming in, Redskin." Best stand aside if you want to keep breathing. Nantan positioned himself. Between Maggie and the door, rifle ready but not yet raised. Last warning, he called. Leave now. Return in peace tomorrow, if wish to talk. Attack tonight brings war. The pounding stopped. Through the window, Maggie could see the men conferring in the gathering darkness. Finally, the first rider spoke. Again, this ain't over, Apache. We'll be back with the law. That girl and her baby belong to the Holbrooks. The sound of horses wheeling around carried through the walls, followed by the thunder of hooves retreating down the mountain. Only when the last echo faded did Nantan lower his rifle. Maggie's legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, shaking. Nantan knelt beside her, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. Meant what I said, he told her softly. Your choice, always your choice. Thank you, she whispered. And the words felt too small for the magnitude of what he offered, not just protection, but the dignity of choosing her own path. They sat in silence as darkness claimed the cabin, the fire casting dancing shadows. On the walls, both knew the riders would return, but for now they had this moment of peace. Maggie watched the flames and felt, despite her fear, a fierce joy in having finally stood her ground. The cold mountain air bit through Nantan's shirt as he stepped onto the porch, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. 5 riders sat astride, their horses, rifles gleaming in the fading light. Their leader, a weathered man with a thick mustache, sneered as Nantan emerged. Mighty bold of you, Indian, taking what ain't yours, the leader called out. That girl belongs to the Holbrooks. Now? Nantan stood perfectly still, his voice carrying across the yard with quiet authority. She belongs to no one but herself. His dark eyes moved from rider to rider. She stays by choice. It's under Apache protection. The men shifted in their saddles, exchanging glances. One of them spat into the snow. Protection? From a lone savage. He raised his rifle. Might be we just burn you out. Cabin like this would catch real quick. Inside, Maggie pressed herself against the wall beside the window, one hand protectively curved around her swollen belly. Her heart thundered so loud she was sure they could hear it outside. But when she peered around the curtain, the sight of Nantan's calm stance steadied her somehow. Think careful, Nantan said, his tone unchanged despite the threat. Fire brings warriors. Apache do not forget burned homes. He took one step forward. Leave now. Return with peaceful words. Welcome. Then, the leader's face reddened. You threatening us, Redskin, stating truth. Your choice what happens next. A tense silence stretched out, broken only by the stamp of nervous horses and the whisper of wind through pine needles. Maggie held her breath, watching the men's faces shift from anger to uncertainty as they measured Nantan's unwavering presence. Finally, the leader lowered his rifle. This ain't over. Mr. Holbrook will come himself when he hears about this. He won't stand for his grandchild being raised by no Indian. Then he can come. Talk like man, not send boys with matches. The insult hit home. 2 of the riders started forward, but their leader held up his hand. Save it. We'll let the boss handle this his own way. He wheeled his horse around. You remember this warning, Indian, and you tell that girl she's brought trouble right to your door. The riders thundered away, their threats hanging in the cold air. Only when the sound of hooves faded did Nantan return inside, closing the door quietly behind him. Maggie stood in the middle of the room, trembling. I'm so sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. I never meant to bring danger to you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Maybe I should go before they come back. Nantan crossed to the hearth, adding wood to the dying fire. The flames leaped up, casting his profile in sharp relief. Worth more than $2, girl? He said softly. Worth more than gold. His words only made her cry harder. "But I'm not. Look at me." She gestured at herself desperately. Too big. Too clumsy. Worthless, like Pa always said. Couldn't even keep the baby's father interested. Just another rich boy's mistake he needed to hide. Nantan turned to face her, his expression grave. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair near the fire. "Need to hear truth now." Maggie sank into the chair, wiping futilely at her tears. The firelight danced across the cabin walls as Nantan settled onto a stool nearby. "Among my people," he began, his deep voice gentle, "women are measured by strength here." He touched his chest. "By courage to face hard times. By power to bring life." His eyes met hers. "Not by how little space they take." Fresh tears welled up, but Maggie couldn't look away from his earnest gaze. "Child is gift," he continued. "Always gift. No matter how it comes." He leaned forward slightly. "Men who plant seed, then run. They are weak ones. Not child, not mother." The words she'd held inside for so long came rushing out. "But everyone in town knows. They whisper about me, the fat Irish girl who thought she could catch young Mr. Holbrook, who got herself in trouble and brought shame to everyone." Her voice broke. "My own PA sold me like a worn-out mare because I was too much trouble to feed." "Man who sells daughter is not father," Nantan said firmly. "Man who plants seed then denies it is not father." He touched his chest again. "Father is here. In heart that chooses to love, protect, teach." Something broke inside Maggie then. Some wall she'd built around her pain. She buried her face in her hands and wept, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, for the first time since she could remember. She didn't try to hide her tears or muffle her grief. Nantan sat quietly, keeping watch as she cried out years of shame and rejection. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. When her sobs finally quieted to hiccups, he rose and brought her a cup of water. "Rest now," he said, draping a blanket around her shoulders. "Tomorrow, enough time for worry." But Maggie knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Not with the rider's threats still echoing in her mind. She watched Nantan check the door's heavy bar, then settle into his chair with his rifle across his knees. His profile was sharp against the firelight, watchful and steady. How strange, she thought, that she felt safer here with this scarred Apache. Warrior than she ever had in her stepfather's house. How strange that this man who'd paid $2 for her had given her something priceless instead, the right to choose her own path. And the dignity to walk it with her head high. Dawn brought a brief respite from the snow, though heavy clouds hung low over the mountains. Nantan helped Maggie onto his mule, wrapping her in an extra blanket against the biting wind. He led them down a narrow trail through the pines, the mule picking its way carefully over frozen ground. "Where are we going?" Maggie asked, clutching the saddle horn as they descended. "To see friend," Nantan replied, his breath visible in the cold air. "Man who speaks to Creator. Good man." After an hour's careful travel, they emerged from the tree line to see a simple wooden church nestled in a small valley. Its weathered cross stood stark against the gray sky, and smoke curled from a stone chimney. A bell hung silent in the modest tower as they approached. The door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out, his black coat dusted with snow. His kind face creased into a smile when he saw Nantan. "Welcome, old friend," he called out, descending the steps. "It's been too long since you visited." Nantan inclined his head respectfully. "Reverend Hale." He helped Maggie down from the mule, steadying her carefully. "Bring someone who needs your words." The Reverend's warm eyes took in Maggie's condition and nervous demeanor without judgment. "Please, come inside where it's warm. I've just made coffee." The church's interior was simple but welcoming, with rough-hewn pews and a pot-bellied stove radiating heat. Reverend Hale gestured them to seats near the fire, pouring coffee into tin cups. Maggie wrapped her cold fingers around the warm metal, breathing in the comforting aroma. "Now then," the Reverend said, settling into his chair, "what brings you down the mountain on such a cold morning?" Maggie glanced at Nanton, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. The words came hesitantly at first, then faster as she shared her story, her mother's death, her stepfather's cruelty, the wealthy rancher's son who had used and abandoned her, the auction block where Nantan had found her. Reverend Hale listened without interruption, his face grave but compassionate. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them. "Nantan has been my friend for many years," he said finally. "I've seen him show kindness to lost travelers, defend the weak without violence when possible, and live honorably before God and man." He leaned forward, addressing Maggie directly. "What he offers you is not marriage. I cannot perform that ceremony without proper banns and documentation. But I can record a covenant of protection, witnessing before God that you are under his care and part of his household. Would that make it proper?" Maggie asked softly. "In God's eyes?" The Reverend smiled. "My dear, God sees the heart, and I believe he has led you to a guardian who will honor both you and your child." He rose and went to his desk, returning with a leather-bound book. "Let me make an entry that establishes your place in Nantan's household. It may help if questions arise later." As he wrote in his careful hand, Maggie felt something ease in her chest, some tight knot of shame beginning to loosen. When the Reverend finished writing, he asked them both to make their marks below his words. Nantan signed with a precise cross, while Maggie managed her full name in shaky letters. "Now," Reverend Hale said, closing the book, "let us pray together for God's blessing on this household." They bowed their heads as his voice filled the small church, asking for protection, wisdom, and peace for this unusual family. When he finished, Maggie was crying quietly, but they were healing tears. The ride home seemed easier, despite the gathering clouds. Near midday, they reached the cabin just as the first new snowflakes began to fall. "Storm coming," Nantan observed, studying the sky. "Must fix roof first." He showed Maggie how to hold the ladder steady while he climbed up to inspect the cedar shakes. "Hand me those," he called down, pointing to a stack of wooden shingles. Maggie found herself growing stronger as she passed materials up to him, learning to anticipate what he needed next. The work was hard, but it felt good to be useful. When Nantan noticed her tiring, he insisted she rest, but she shook her head. "I want to help," she said firmly. "This is my home too now." His smile was quick but warm. They worked until the roof was sound, the last nail driven just as the snow began falling harder. Inside the cabin, Maggie set about preparing supper, surprising Nantan by adding wild onions she'd noticed growing near the woodpile to the venison stew. The savory smell filled the small space as darkness gathered outside. When the meal was ready, they sat at the rough table, steam rising from their bowls. Nantan bowed his head, then looked at Maggie expectantly. "Would you speak thanks?" he asked. Softly, Maggie's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know proper words. Speak from heart. Creator hears all languages." Maggie closed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them. "Dear God," she whispered, "thank you for a roof and someone who cares." She paused, throat tight. "Amen." "Good prayer," Nantan said proudly. Simple words, true heart. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in white. But inside the cabin, warmth and something like peace had taken root. Maggie watched the flames dance in the hearth, listening to the comfortable sounds of Nantan's spoon against his bowl. and felt truly at home for the first time she could remember. The first major snowstorm trapped them in the cabin for 3 days straight. Maggie stood at the window, watching white flakes swirl past like dancing feathers. The drifts had grown taller than the woodpile, and the world beyond seemed wrapped in silence. "Restless?" Nantain asked, noticing her fidgeting hands. Maggie nodded. "I'm not used to being so still." She pressed a hand to her swollen belly, where the baby kicked strongly. Nantain rose from his chair by the fire and went to a wooden chest in the corner. He returned with supple deer hide, sinew thread, and bone needles. "Time to learn making moccasins," he said, spreading the materials on the table. "Oh, I couldn't," Maggie protested. "My stitches are terrible. You should see my attempts at darning." "Socks." Nantain's eyes crinkled. "Apache women say first pair, always crooked. Second pair, better. By 10th pair, walk proud in own work." He showed her how to measure and cut the soft hide, demonstrating the careful stitches that would shape leather. Around a foot. Maggie's first attempts were indeed clumsy. She pricked her fingers and made uneven seams. But instead of feeling ashamed, she found herself laughing at her mistakes. "Look," she said, holding up a misshapen attempt. "It looks more like a fish than a shoe." Nantain chuckled, a deep rumble that filled the cabin. "Fish shoe may be good for walking in creek." Each day, Maggie's stitches grew straighter. Nantain praised her progress, showing her how to add beadwork designs along the edges. His large hands were surprisingly delicate with the tiny beads, and he taught her traditional patterns that told stories in their shapes. When evening came, they would sit by the fire while Maggie read aloud from the Bible Reverend Hale had loaned. Then Nantain listened intently, often asking her to pause and explain passages. "This Jesus," he said one night after she read about the prodigal son, "he speaks much of forgiveness." "Yes," Maggie replied, touching the pages gently. He taught that God forgives all who truly repent, and that we should forgive others too, even enemies. Nantain's face was thoughtful in the firelight. "Especially enemies," the Bible says. "Though I reckon that's the hardest part." Nantain nodded slowly. "Many nights I pray to forgive soldiers who shot me. Some nights I can. Some nights anger returns." "That's natural, isn't it?" Maggie said softly. "The trying matters, I think." His hunger for scripture amazed her. He would often ask her to read the same passages multiple times, weighing each word carefully. Sometimes he would share how the stories echoed Apache teachings about honor and mercy. The blizzard howled outside, but their evenings passed peacefully, with scripture and sewing, until one night Maggie woke with a gasp of pain. The contractions had begun. Nantain jumped from his chair by the fire, his face alarmed but determined. "Baby comes now." Maggie nodded, gripping the edge of her bed as another pain ripped through her. "Too early," she whispered. The preacher's wife was supposed to help. "Storm too deep for travel," Nantain said, already moving with purpose around the cabin. "But I have seen Apache women birth many babies. We will manage." He built up the fire and set water to boil, then laid clean blankets near the hearth where it was warmest. With gentle hands, he helped Maggie walk small circles around the cabin between contractions, supporting her weight when the pains grew. "Fierce. Apache women say walking helps baby find way," he explained, his voice steady, though his eyes showed worry. "You are strong, like they are strong." Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. Nantain never left her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths, helping her change positions, speaking soft encouragement in mixed Apache and English. When Maggie felt she couldn't continue, his quiet strength kept her going. "Breathe like wind." In Pines, he would say, "Pain comes like storm, but passes like storm too." Near dawn, the final stage began. Nantain knelt behind Maggie, supporting her as she pushed. His prayers mingled with her cries, Apache words and Christian plea rising together in the candlelit cabin, with a final tremendous effort. Maggie delivered her son into Nantan's waiting hands. The baby's first cry rang out strong and clear as the first light of dawn crept through the windows. "A boy," Nantan announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in warm cloths. "Healthy son." Maggie reached for her child with trembling hands. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his fists waving with surprising strength. Despite her exhaustion, joy bloomed in her chest like a sunrise. "Samuel," she whispered. "His name is Samuel." Nantan helped settle mother and child comfortably, then sat beside them, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. With infinite tenderness, he touched one tiny hand with his scarred finger. Samuel's fingers curled around it instinctively. "Shia Nantan," murmured in Apache. "My son." Tears tracked silently down his weathered cheeks as he gazed at the child who would never share his blood, but already claimed his heart. Maggie watched them through tired eyes, her fierce protector reduced to wonder by this new life. Morning. Light filtered through the frost-covered windows, making the cabin glow like a sanctuary. In that moment, their small home felt touched by heaven itself. Samuel's birth had transformed them from two wounded souls, seeking shelter into something more, a true family, bound by choice and love rather than blood. Maggie saw it in Nantan's face as he cradled the baby, in the way he spoke the word son like a prayer of gratitude. Outside, the storm had passed. Fresh snow blanketed the world in pristine white, and the morning sun sparked diamonds from every crystal surface. Inside the cabin, wrapped in warmth and wonder, a new family welcomed their first dawn together. The first week after Samuel's birth passed in a gentle haze. Maggie spent hours in the rocking chair by the hearth, nursing her son, while watching snow drift past the windows. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, as if Samuel's presence had filled empty corners with light. Nantan moved quietly around them, tending the fire and preparing meals so Maggie could rest. In quiet moments, he would hum low Apache melodies that made Samuel's eyes grow heavy. The songs had a haunting beauty, though Maggie couldn't understand the words. "What do they mean?" she asked one evening, as Samuel dozed at her breast. "Old songs," Nantan explained, stirring the stew pot. "About stars watching over sleeping children, about wind carrying dreams." His voice grew soft. "My mother sang these to me long ago." During Samuel's afternoon naps, Nantan worked at the table, carefully carving a cradle from pine wood. His huge hands moved with surprising delicacy as he shaped the headboard, smoothing each edge until it felt like silk. Maggie found herself watching his focused expression, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, how tenderly he tested every surface to ensure no splinter remained. "Beautiful work," she said one day, running her fingers along the finished rails. Nantan smiled, his eyes crinkling. For beautiful son. He had carved delicate patterns along the sides, flowing lines that reminded Maggie of running deer. She felt something warm bloom in her chest, watching him work, something deeper than gratitude. The way he handled Samuel with such reverence, how his entire face softened when the baby gripped his finger, how patiently he walked the floor during colicky nights. Maggie realized she was coming to care for him as more than just her protector. But their peaceful days couldn't last forever. Word of Samuel's birth spread through the scattered homesteads like wildfire. One crisp morning, Maggie spotted a ranch hand on the ridge, watching their chimney smoke. The man rode off quickly when Nantan stepped outside, but the damage was done. That night, they heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats in the snow. Maggie clutched Samuel closer, her heart pounding as the sounds circled their cabin like hunting wolves. Nantan stood at the window, rifle ready, but held low. "They test us," he said quietly. looking for weakness. What do they want? Whispered, though she feared she knew. To frighten us first. Nantan's face was grim in the lamplight. Make us run, make mistakes. Samuel whimpered, perhaps sensing his mother's fear. Maggie bounced him gently, trying to keep her voice steady. As she hummed one of Nantan's lullabies. The hoofbeats eventually faded, but sleep was long in coming that night. At first light, Nantan prepared to leave the cabin. Maggie stood at the door, Samuel bundled against her chest, watching anxiously as Nantan checked his rifle and gathered. Rope and wire must set traps on trail, he explained. Not to harm to warn us when they come. When, not if. Maggie's voice quavered. Nantan touched her cheek gently. We face truth to be strong. They will come. He looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully. But we are ready. Maggie watched from the window as Nantan moved through the trees, setting his alarms along the snowy path. Her throat felt tight. For the first time since Samuel's birth, she felt the full weight of what she might lose, not just her son, but this man who had become so dear, this home they had built together. The thought of returning to emptiness made her chest ache. The sun was setting when they heard a horse approaching at speed. Nantan raised his rifle, but lowered it quickly as Reverend Hale's voice called out, "Friends, it's Hale." The preacher's face was flushed from hard riding as he stamped snow from his boots inside the cabin. His usually neat collar was askew, his breath coming in clouds in the cold air. "The rancher?" he said, without preamble. Accepting the cup of coffee Maggie pressed into his hands. "He's declaring claim to the child." Maggie sank into the rocking chair, clutching Samuel tighter. "He can't. He has no right. It claims blood." "Rights," Hale said grimly. "Says the child is his son's legitimate heir, regardless of circumstances. He's gathering men, talking about rescuing his grandson from—" The preacher hesitated. "From Apache savage," Nantan finished quietly. "Speak truth, friend." Hale nodded sadly. "I tried reasoning with him, spoke of Christian charity, of letting peace prevail. But he's a proud man, used to having his way. He means to take the boy by force if needed." Maggie felt tears burning her eyes. "Samuel is my son, our son." She looked at Nantan, who stood like a statue by the fire. "We're his family." The law hall began hesitantly. "Law is for white men," Nantan said. His voice was calm, but Maggie saw steel in his eyes. "We have higher law. Law of heart. Law of God, who makes families not just from blood." The preacher straightened his collar, looking between them. "You mean to stand firm then?" "Yes," Maggie said, surprised at the strength in her own voice. "This is our home. Samuel belongs here, with us." Nantan moved to stand behind her chair, one hand resting protective on her shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes. They would face whatever came together. Hale nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can to mediate. Perhaps if cooler heads prevail, but—" His voice lacked conviction. They all knew the rancher's reputation for getting his way. After the preacher left, Maggie and Nantan sat long into the night, Samuel sleeping peacefully between them. They spoke quietly of practical things, extra supplies to store, escape routes to plan, signals to arrange with friendly neighbors. But beneath the planning lay deeper currents of fear and determination. When Samuel stirred for his midnight feeding, Nantan built up the fire and brought Maggie a cup of tea. He watched them in the firelight, his dark eyes soft with emotion. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we face together." Maggie reached for his hand, twining her fingers through his. "Together," she echoed, and felt strength in the word. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Inside their cabin, a family held fast against the gathering storm. The morning after Reverend Hale's warning. Nantan led Maggie behind the cabin where he had set up 3 tin cans on a fallen log. He carried his old shotgun, its stock worn smooth from years of use. "Must learn to protect," he said, offering her the weapon. For Samuel, Amagu stared at the gun, her hands trembling slightly. I wouldn't know how." "We'll teach." Nanton's voice was gentle, but firm. "Mother bear fights for cubs. You are mother now." He showed her how to hold the shotgun, his large hands adjusting her grip with patient care. The weapon felt heavy and awkward in her arms. Maggie's heart thundered as he taught her to brace it against her shoulder, explaining how to sight down the barrel. "Breathe slow," he instructed. "Like when you calm Samuel. Steady heart, steady hands." Maggie tried to focus on the nearest can, remembering how she breathed through labor pains. The metal sight wavered, then steadied. "Now squeeze," Nantan said. "Softly. Don't pull." The blast startled her despite his warning. The kick knocked her back a step, but Nantan's steady hand kept her upright. Through clearing smoke, she saw the middle can spinning in the snow. "I hit it," Maggie exclaimed, surprised joy in her voice. "I actually hit it." Nantan's face broke into a rare, full smile. "Strong mother, strong son," he said proudly. Again. They practiced until Maggie's shoulder ached, but she hit more cans than she missed. Each successful shot built her confidence. By noon, she could reload smoothly and aim true more often than not. That evening, as Samuel nursed contentedly, Nantan prepared a hearty stew of venison and wild onions. The cabin was warm with wood smoke and cooking smells. Maggie watched him work, noting how he moved with quiet purpose in everything he did. "Tell me about your mother," she said suddenly. "What? Was she like—" Nantan stirred the pot thoughtfully before answering. "Wise woman, proud, but not foolish proud." He sat in his chair by the fire. "When soldiers drove us from our lands, many warriors wanted war. But mother said dignity lives in heart, not place." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked softly. "She teach?" "Me." He paused, searching for words. "Teach me man's worth is not in land owned or battles won. Worth is in how he treats others, how he keeps faith." His eyes turned to Samuel, how he protects family. Maggie understood then. Nantan saw Samuel as more than just a child to raise. The boy was his chance to pass on his mother's wisdom, too. Create legacy through love rather than blood. The peaceful moment shattered 3 days later. Dusk was settling over the mountain when they heard horses approaching. Many horses. Nantan moved swiftly to the window while Maggie grabbed Samuel from his cradle. 8 riders, he reported grimly, armed. Before Maggie could respond, orange light flared outside. Cruel laughter drifted up as the men set fire to the carefully stacked woodpile. "Come out, Apache," a voice shouted. "Give up the woman and child, or we burn you out." Nantan's face was stone. "Get behind wall with Samuel," he ordered quietly. "Keep shotgun ready." He stepped onto the porch, his rifle lowered but visible. The firelight caught his massive frame, casting his shadow long across the snow. "Leave this place," his deep voice carried clearly. "No one here belongs to you." A rifle cracked in response, the bullet splintering wood by Nantan's head. He dove aside as more shots followed. Kide's heart pounded as she clutched Samuel with one arm, shotgun ready in her other hand. Through the window, she saw a rider trying to circle behind the cabin. Without thinking, she braced the shotgun and fired. The blast caught the horse's flank, sending it rearing. Its rider tumbled into the snow. The victory was short-lived, while Nantan exchanged fire with the men in front and Maggie's attention was fixed on the window. She never heard the back door quietly open. Samuel's sudden wail made her spin around. A rough-looking man had the baby in his arms, already backing toward the door. "No!" Maggie screamed, dropping the shotgun and lunging forward. But the man was too quick. She chased him outside, heedless of bullets, reaching desperately for her. "Son?" The rider swung into his saddle, Samuel's cries piercing the night. Other horses wheeled around him as the group retreated into the darkness. Taking her heart with them, Maggie ran until she stumbled in the snow, screaming Samuel's name until her voice broke. Nantan's strong arms finally caught her, pulling her back as she fought to follow the fading hoofbeats. "My baby," she sobbed. "They took my baby." Nantan held her tightly as she collapsed, her whole body shaking with grief and rage. His own face was twisted with anguish as he stared into the darkness where their son had vanished. The burning woodpile cast cruel light over the trampled snow, smoke rising like morning into the star-filled sky. Inside the cabin, Samuel's empty. Cradle rocked slightly in the cold wind through the open door. Maggie's legs gave out beneath her as Samuel's cries faded into the night. She crumpled into the snow, her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear from her very soul. The empty cradle in her arms felt like a mockery of all she had lost. "My fault," she choked out between gasps. "Should have watched closer. Should have protected him better." Nantan knelt beside her, one hand pressed against his side where a bullet had grazed him. Blood darkened his shirt, but his voice remained steady. "No time for blame. Must follow now, while tracks are fresh." Maggie looked up through tear-blurred eyes, seeing the crimson stain spreading beneath his fingers. "You're hurt. Small wound," he said, though his face was drawn with pain. "Samuel needs us more." They struggled to their feet together, supporting each other. The night air bit cold against their faces as they hurried inside to gather supplies. Maggie's hands shook as she packed blankets and what little food they had. Nantan moved more slowly than usual, checking his rifle and ammunition with grim determination. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when they heard the creak of wagon wheels. Both tensed until they recognized Reverend Hale's voice calling, "Out! Friends, it's just me. Don't shoot." The preacher appeared in the doorway, his normally neat appearance disheveled from hard riding. "I came as soon as I heard the shots." His eyes took in their desperate state. "Dear Lord, they really did take the child." Maggie could only nod, fresh tears spilling. "I brought my mule cart," Hale said firmly. "We'll need it to reach the ranch." "Nantan, you're in no condition to ride." Together they loaded the cart with supplies. Nantan insisted on bringing Samuel's cradle, carefully wrapping it in blankets. The morning sun revealed the violence of the night: scorched wood, bullet holes in the cabin walls, trampled snow marked with blood. They set out as dawn broke fully over the mountains. Hale drove the cart while Nantan studied the tracks left by the kidnappers. The trail led down from the heights toward the sprawling valley where the wealthy rancher's estate lay. Maggie sat in the back, clutching the empty cradle, her eyes never leaving the horizon. The going was slow. The cart had to navigate carefully over rough terrain, and Nantan's wound forced frequent stops to rest. By midday, dark clouds threatened snow that would cover their quarry's trail. Maggie's anxiety grew with each passing hour. "What if they hurt him?" she whispered during one stop. "He's so small, so helpless." "Samuel is strong, like his mother," Nantan assured her, though pain lined his face. "We will find him." When night fell, they took shelter beneath an overhanging rock ledge. Reverend Hale built a small fire while Nantan checked the trail ahead. Maggie sat with the cradle in her lap, rocking it gently as she sang the lullaby she would use to soothe Samuel to sleep. "Hush now, my baby. Be still, love. Don't cry." Her voice broke on the familiar words. Nantan returned to the firelight, moving stiffly from his wound. He knelt beside her, placing his large hand over hers where it gripped the cradle. "I will not rest until Samuel is in your arms," he promised softly. "This I swear." Reverend Hale pulled out his worn Bible, its pages glowing in the firelight. "Let me share some words of comfort," he said, turning to the Psalms. His steady voice filled their small shelter. "Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation." The ancient words wrapped around them like a blanket, strengthening their resolve. Maggie felt tears on her cheeks, but these were different from her earlier desperate weeping. These were tears of determination, of hope that refused to die. They traveled 2 more days, following the trail through frozen creek beds and snow-laden forests. Nantone's tracking skills never faltered, though his wound clearly pained him. Maggie learned to read signs herself: broken twigs, displaced stones, the particular mark of shod horses in snow. On the 3rd day, as afternoon light began to fade, they crested a rise and saw it. The rancher's estate spread out below them. The main house was a sprawling wooden mansion, its windows glowing with lamplight. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and a tall fence enclosed the whole compound. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, rifles gleaming on their shoulders. Maggie's heart clenched at the sight. Somewhere in that fortress, her baby needed her. She gripped the side of the cart until her knuckles went white. "How will we ever get him out?" she whispered. Nantan studied the layout with narrowed eyes. Many guards, but all men sleep, need patience, need cunning. And we need faith. Reverend Hale added quietly. "The Lord makes a way where there seems to be none." They pulled the cart back into the shelter of the trees to make plans. The night ahead would demand everything they had: courage, wisdom, and desperate love that refused to surrender. Maggie touched the empty cradle one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "Hold on, Samuel, Mama's coming." Night settled over the valley like a heavy blanket, bringing both cover and danger. Maggie Nantum and Reverend Hale crept through the shadows toward the ranch house, staying low behind snow-dusted shrubs. The cold bit through Maggie's clothes, but she barely noticed. Her entire being focused on finding Samuel. Armed men patrolled the grounds, their boots crunching in the frozen snow. Nanten guided them expertly between the guards' paths, his years of tracking showing in every silent step. Despite his wound, he moved like a shadow, steadying Maggie when she stumbled. They reached the edge of the lamplight spilling from the main house. Maggie's heart thundered in her chest as they crouched beneath a window. Voices drifted out, a woman's soft weeping mixed with a baby's familiar coos. "Samuel," Maggie whispered, her fingers pressing against the cold glass. Rising slightly, she peered inside. The scene before her made her breath catch. The rancher's wife sat in a fine rocking chair, cradling Samuel against her chest. The woman's face was streaked with tears as she gazed down at the baby. Expensive furnishings filled the room, but the lady's misery seemed to dim their shine. "My husband brings such shame," the woman murmured to Samuel. "Using force to claim you, hurting your mother. This isn't right, little one." Maggie felt tears well in her own eyes. She started to rise further, but Reverend Hale's hand gripped her arm. "Wait," he whispered urgently. "We can't just burst in. They'll shoot first and ask questions later." "But he's right there," Maggie pleaded, her voice breaking. "My baby, dawn comes soon," Nantan said softly. "Better to face them in light, with witnesses." Though every instinct screamed to crash through the window and snatch Samuel back, Maggie knew they were right. They retreated to their hiding place in the trees, where she spent the night watching the house, counting the seconds until sunrise. As morning light crept over the mountains, they approached the ranch's main gate. Nantan walked tall, despite his injury, Maggie at his side. Reverend Hale followed, Bible in hand. The guards raised their rifles. The rancher, Nantan, called out, "We come to speak with him." Minutes later, the rancher himself strode out, a broad man in an expensive coat. His face darkened at the sight of them, "You dare show your faces here," he spat. "That child is my blood, my grandson and heir. No Apache savage will raise him." Maggie stepped forward, trembling but fierce. "Samuel is my son. You have no rights." The rancher laughed harshly. "What rights does a fat Irish girl sold at auction have? My foolish boy may have gotten you in trouble, but that child is a boon. He'll be raised proper with his true family." More ranch hands appeared, rifles ready. But movement at the edge of the yard caught Maggie's attention. People were gathering. Townsfolk drawn by the confrontation. She recognized faces from the auction where Nantan had bought her. Something shifted inside Maggie. All the shame, all the hurt, all the years of being told she was worthless, it crystallized into a sudden, burning courage. "Listen," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Listen, all of you." The crowd grew still. Even the rancher paused. "This man would steal my child because I am poor and fat," Maggie declared, tears streaming down her face. "He thinks his money gives him the right to rip a baby from his mother's arms. Yet this Apache," she gestured to Nantan, "this man, you, all scorned, gave me honor when none of you would." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Maggie saw women clutching their shawls, men shifting uncomfortably. "Nantan bought me for $2 silver," she continued. "Not to use me, but to protect me. He offered my child a father's love, asked nothing in return but to share his home and heart. Tell me, who is the savage here?" The rancher's face flushed dark with rage. "Enough. Clear these vermin from my property." He gestured sharply to his men. The armed hands started forward. But Reverend Hale stepped between them, raising his Bible. "Hi, the law requires witnesses," he declared in his carrying preacher's voice. "This child's parentage, his custody, it must be settled proper before God and community. Are you afraid to let justice be seen?" More townspeople were arriving now. Maggie saw the general store owner, the blacksmith, women from church. Their eyes moved from her to the rancher, judgment in their gazes. The rancher glared at the growing crowd, his authority eroding with each passing moment. His men held their rifles ready, but uncertainty showed in their stance. Maggie stood straighter, drawing strength from Nantan's solid presence beside her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as someone's shame or burden, but as a mother fighting for her child with dignity and courage. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the trampled snow as the standoff continued. The town gathered, watching, waiting to see if justice would prevail over power, if love would prove stronger than pride. A commotion stirred at the edge of the gathering crowd. People parted as Sheriff Wilson strode through, his badge glinting. In the morning sun, Reverend Hale's face showed relief. He had sent a boy to fetch the lawmen while they'd camped the previous night. "What's all this about?" the sheriff demanded, his weathered face stern as he surveyed the scene. Armed men facing off against Maggie, Nantan, and the Reverend. The rancher stepped forward quickly, his expensive coat rustling. "Sheriff, these people are trespassing. They're trying to steal my grandson." "Your grandson?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he looked at Maggie holding Samuel. "My son got mixed up with this girl," the rancher said, pulling out a leather pouch that clinked heavily. "But the child's a boon by blood. Here's $200 to settle any claim she thinks she has." The sheriff's eyes flickered to the money, then back to the standoff before him. Maggie's heart sank as she saw his hesitation. The law often bent to wealth in these parts, but Reverend Hale stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Sheriff Wilson, I have here a covenant of protection, signed and witnessed 3 weeks ago. It declares Maggie O'Donnell and her unborn child under the legal protection of Nantan's household." The sheriff took the document, frowning as he read. The rancher's face darkened. "That Apache has no right," he started, but the sheriff held up his hand. "This bears my deputy's mark as witness," the lawman said slowly, "and Reverend Hale's signature. Under territorial law, it's binding." Maggie felt hope surge in her chest. She stepped forward. Samuel clutched tight against her. "Please," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent yard. "This child is mine. I carried him, I bore him, I love him." Tears streaked down her cheeks, but she stood straight and proud. Blood does not make a father, love does. Nantan moved beside her, dropping to one knee in the snow. His deep voice was quiet but firm. "I choose this boy as son. I choose this woman as family. By Apache law, by white man's law, I claim them." The crowd stirred. Maggie saw faces she recognized from that bitter auction day. The baker's wife, who had laughed, the storekeeper, who jeered. But now their expressions held something different: shame, understanding, perhaps even respect. "You can't allow this." The rancher's face had gone purple with rage. "My bloodline won't be raised by what?" A woman's voice cut through. The rancher's wife emerged from the house, her eyes red from crying. "By people who love him." "Oh. Who?" "Chose him. Better than being raised by a man who would tear a baby from his mother's arms." More voices rose from the crowd. "I saw that auction," the blacksmith called. "Saw how that Apache treated her with dignity when we showed none." "They've been at church regular," added another, "sitting quiet in the back, but there every Sunday." Sheriff looked from the covenant to the growing support among the townsfolk. His jaw worked as he considered. "The law's clear enough," he said finally. "The child stays with his mother, under the protection of her legal household." He fixed the rancher with a hard stare. "Unless you want to contest this in territorial court with all these witnesses." The rancher's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Maggie feared he would order his men to shoot. But the weight of the town's judgment pressed heavy. Without a word, he spun and stormed toward the house. "Bring the baby," he barked at his wife. She was already moving, carrying Samuel to Maggie with gentle hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered as she passed him over. "Take good care of him." Maggie clutched Samuel to her chest, tears flowing freely now. His familiar weight, his sweet smell, her whole world had returned to her arms. Nantan stood, placing one hand on Samuel's head and the other on Maggie's shoulder, forming a protective circle around them both. The ranch hands lowered their rifles, backing away. The gathered crowd began to smile, then cheer. It started softly, a few hand claps growing to a wave of approval. These same people who had mocked Maggie months ago now celebrated as she stood tall between her chosen protector and their preacher, her baby safe in her arms. "Let's go home," Nantan said softly. Reverend Hale stepped forward to shake the sheriff's hand, thanking him for upholding the law. As they turned to leave, townspeople pressed forward to pat Nantan's shoulder, to touch Maggie's arm, to coo at Samuel, no longer outcasts, but a family that had shown them all a better way. The morning sun painted the snow in brilliant white as they walked away from the ranch, heading toward their mountain cabin. Maggie held Samuel close, marveling at how much could change in a single season, from shame to dignity, from loneliness to belonging, from cruel laughter to heartfelt cheers. The journey home felt different now. Snow crunched beneath their boots as Maggie, Nantan, and Reverend Hale made their way back to the mountain cabin. Samuel slept peacefully against Maggie's chest, wrapped snug in warm blankets. The morning sun painted long shadows across the pristine drifts, and for the first time in days, they could breathe easy. Maggie's arms ached from holding Samuel so tight, but she couldn't bear to loosen her grip. Every few steps, she would press her nose to his downy head, breathing in his sweet scent. Nantan walked beside them, his eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead, though the danger had passed. Reverend Hale led his mule cart, now empty of the supplies they'd brought for the confrontation. The only sound was the gentle creak of wooden wheels in snow and Samuel's soft breathing. Near midday, they stopped to rest in a sunny clearing. As Maggie settled on a fallen log to nurse Samuel, tears began rolling down her cheeks. "What troubles you?" Nantan asked, his deep voice gentle with concern. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping her face with her free hand. "All those weeks I spent doubting myself, feeling worthless. I almost let them take him because I didn't believe I deserved him." Nantan knelt in the snow before her, his scarred face serious. "You are mother of strength," he said firmly. "My son chose you. In your belly, in your arms, in your heart, he knows where he belongs." Reverend Hale, tending his mule nearby, smiled quietly at their exchange. The preacher had seen many families in his years of service, but few bonds as pure as this one, forged in winter's trials. They reached the cabin by late afternoon. The sight of the scorched woodpile and bullet marks on the walls made Maggie's heart clench. But Nantan squeezed her shoulder gently. "We will rebuild," he assured her, "stronger now." As if to prove his words true, they found 2 men from town already there, stacking fresh-cut logs beside the cabin. The baker's wife stood on the porch, sweeping away broken glass and spent cartridges. A thought. "You might need some help," one of the men called out, touching his hat brim to Maggie. The same folk who had jeered at her months ago now offered quiet respect, transformed by witnessing love's courage. The baker's wife hurried forward, arms full of fresh bread and dried apples. "For the baby," she said softly, unable to meet Maggie's eyes, "and to say I'm sorry before." Maggie accepted the gifts with grace she hadn't known she possessed. "Much obliged," she said simply, and saw relief wash over the woman's face. As evening approached, their helpers departed with promises to return tomorrow. Reverend Hale also bid them farewell, but not before blessing their home anew. "God's hand is clear in this," he said, smiling at the unlikely family before him. "Love builds stronger bonds than blood." Inside the cabin, Maggie set about making dinner while Nantan repaired the broken window. Samuel lay content in his wooden cradle, watching his father work. The domestic scene felt both ordinary and miraculous, everything she'd never dared to dream of having. After their meal, Nantan took Samuel in his arms, settling into the rocking chair he'd carved months ago. His deep voice lifted in an Apache lullaby, the strange, beautiful words flowing like water. Maggie watched them from her place by the hearth, her heart so full it ached. The lamp burned low, casting warm light across the cabin's wooden walls. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle now, his tiny fists curled tight. Maggie sat beside Nantan near the fire, their shoulders touching. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her voice hardly more than a whisper, "about what makes a real family." She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "I'd be your wife, if you'll have me." Nantan's breath caught. In the firelight, she saw tears glisten in his dark eyes. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Already are," he said hoarsely, "in my heart." They sat in silence then, hands clasped, while the hearth fire painted them in soft gold. No ceremony could make their bond more true than this quiet moment, witnessed by sleeping Samuel and the winter stars beyond their window. Maggie leaned her head against Nantan's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside their cabin, warmth and love kept winter's chill at bay. Together, they had built something stronger than shame or scorn or society's narrow views. They had built a family. Spring crept into the mountain. Valley like a gentle awakening. The last patches of snow melted away, revealing tender grass shoots that painted the slopes in delicate green. Around the cabin, wild iris and mountain bluebells dotted the earth with splashes of purple and blue, their delicate petals dancing in the warm breeze. Maggie knelt in her newly tilled garden, her hands deep in the rich soil. Months of splitting wood and hauling water had strengthened her arms, and her movements were sure and steady as she planted rows of corn and beans. From his cradle nearby, Samuel watched with bright eyes, occasionally letting out happy squeals. That made his mother smile. "See those beans, little one?" Maggie said, holding up the seeds for him to examine. "They'll grow tall and strong, just like your pa." She glanced over at Nantan, who was working on the cabin's new addition, his powerful frame moving with purpose as he fitted logs together. The sound of hammering filled the air as Nantan carefully shaped the growing structure. He had spent weeks preparing the timber, ensuring each piece was strong enough to withstand mountain winters. "More room needed," he had explained simply when he began. "Others will come." As if his words had been prophecy, Reverend Hale arrived one morning leading his mule cart. Behind him walked two children, a boy of about 10 and his younger sister, perhaps 7. Their clothes were worn thin, and their eyes held the wary look of those who had known too much sorrow. Their father was lost in the mine collapse, Hale explained quietly to Maggie and Nantan. No kin to take them. Before either could respond, the little girl spotted Samuel crawling on a blanket in the grass. Her face lit up, and she took a hesitant step forward. Maggie's heart melted at the sight. She remembered her own loneliness, the ache of having nowhere to belong. "Would you like to meet him?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, and her brother followed close behind as they approached. The baby. Nantan and Hale watched as Maggie helped the children settle on the blanket with Samuel, who immediately reached for the girl's long braid with curious fingers. Soon, their delighted giggles mixed with Samuel's happy babbling. "The town can't place them," Hale said quietly. "Most families are struggling themselves. They stay," Nantan declared, his tone brooking no argument. He looked at Maggie, who nodded firmly. "We have room," she said, thinking of the addition taking shape. "Or we'll make room." That evening, Maggie cooked a hearty stew while the children helped set the table. Their table now. The boy, Thomas, proved eager to learn from Nantan about woodworking, while his sister Sarah attached herself to Maggie's side, watching everything with solemn attention. Can we stay forever?" Sarah whispered that night as Maggie tucked her into bed. "As long as you want," Maggie assured her, smoothing the girl's hair. "This is your home now." As spring deepened into early summer, the cabin buzzed with new life and purpose. Thomas followed Nantan like a shadow, learning to split wood and tend the mule. Sarah proved to have a gentle touch with Samuel, singing him the same lullabies their mother had once sung to her. The garden flourished under Maggie's care. Rows of vegetables stretching toward the sun. She taught Sarah how to tell weeds from seedlings, how to water without drowning the tender plants. Together, they gathered wild strawberries, their fingers stained red with juice. Reverend Hale visited often, bringing books for the children and news from town. Each time, his smile grew wider at the sight of the thriving household. "God works in mysterious ways," he said one afternoon, watching Thomas and Nantan build a fence while Sarah helped Maggie hang laundry. "From two lost souls, he has built a refuge." One bright morning, as sunshine streamed through the cabin windows, Samuel pulled himself up using a chair. Everyone froze, watching as he wobbled on unsteady legs. His face scrunched in concentration as he released his hold. "Come to Papa," Nantan encouraged, kneeling with open arms a few feet away. Thomas and Sarah crowded close, whispering encouragement. Samuel swayed, took one tentative step, then another. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth as he tottered forward, determination written across his tiny face. 3 more wobbly steps brought him within reach of Nantan's waiting hands. The giant's laughter boomed through the cabin as he swept Samuel high into the air. "Strong boy," he proclaimed proudly. "Strong like mountain." Maggie watched them, joy filling her heart until it threatened to overflow. Here in this cabin, surrounded by love, she barely recognized herself as the same girl who had once stood trembling on an auction block. That frightened, worthless creature had transformed into something beautiful. Wife, mother, protector of the lost. Sarah slipped her small hand into Maggie's. "Thank you for wanting us," she whispered. Maggie squeezed the little girl's hand, watching as Nantan showed Samuel to Thomas, both of them grinning with pride at the baby's accomplishment. "Love makes room for more love," she said softly. "That's what your PA taught me." And she knew it was true. The man who could not father a child had become the